We're about to start the Ashes Summer. If you like cricket, if you like sport, if you really like drama, you're going to be really into this in some way or another. It's one of those sporting moments that has the ability to capture everyone's attention. We'll be bringing you all the details on Times Radio, of course, but the best place to read about it is in the Times. They've got great correspondence. They write beautifully about cricket. Cricket's one of those sports, actually, that you want to read about at length. It attracts great writing, and the Times has great writers, including Michael Atherton, former England captain. He's their chief cricket correspondent, and Gideon Haigh, who brings an Australian perspective as well. They'll be writing throughout the Ashes about all the drama, about what's going on, and I get a chance now to sit down and talk to them both about what they really think is coming our way over the course of this Ashes. Michael Atherton is the Times' chief cricket correspondent, and arriving from Australia for the series is Gideon Haigh. Morning to both of you. It's great to speak to you both. It's an unbelievably exciting summer. If you like cricket, this feels like a big one, Michael. Is it always the case? You've captained England in the Ashes. There's something about the Ashes, isn't there?
Yes, I mean, it's a constant, isn't it? The cricket is a rapidly changing landscape at the moment, and of course the Ashes has been there for many of us. It's a thing that has just run like a thread through our lives, really. I can remember very, very dimly watching highlights of England getting a pounding in 74-5 down in Australia, and I must have been about 6 years old at the time. But then it's just been a constant through my life. So it's a gold standard of cricket, 2 formidable sides, over 5 test matches, and of course this particular series, there's probably more excitement. I mean, there's more hype with every passing Ashes series just because of the way the media is and the nature of the media. But I think for those of us involved in the game, there's probably more anticipation about this than for any series since 2005, just because of the way England have played in the last year, utterly transformed by Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum, and a very, very formidable Australian side. So 2 teams meeting at the top of their game.
And there's jeopardy, Gideon, isn't there, for Australia? Because although they're an all-conquering side, especially at home, it's hard to win an Ashes series in England for Australia, isn't it?
Well, they haven't done it since the Michael Atherton era, in fact. 2001. You were the last one to go down, Mike. I think
that is absolutely true. And that says something. They've brought a lot of good teams over the years, Gideon, haven't they? But since my last series, they haven't actually turned us over here.
They haven't. And of course, England has not won a test match in Australia since 2011. So we are going through a period where home advantages is cutting both ways.
Why is that, do you think? Because that's odd, isn't it? That it should have gone quite so far to home advantage.
Well, I think it's just very hard for all teams to win away from home. The compression of tours, the lack of scope to acclimatise, the fact that test matches are often very, very close together. If you lose an early one, it's very difficult to recover. It's a mountain to climb, and I think the first kind of team that works out how to do it on a consistent basis deserves to be kind of the next test match dynasty. I guess Australia did it in their pomp, but no one really has made a habit of it since.
No, it's an interesting point that England are changing how they play. You say it's a very exciting time, Michael. So their approach, the Bazball approach, the tonk it to all corners of the ground approach. This is a big test, isn't it? Because you can play test matches around the world and you can try it. It's worked in Pakistan. It's worked against New Zealand mainly. But to do it against Australia, where they could roll you for 80, to come back and keep playing this Bazball will be one of the great subplots of the series.
Absolutely. I think everybody's fascinated to see how it goes. Of course, people have been saying right throughout the Stokes and McCullum, they've been in charge for just over 12 months now. Every time they beat somebody comes with well, what about the next team? So when they beat New Zealand, people said, well, can they do it against India? When they beat India in a one-off game, they said, well, can they do it against South Africa's pace attack? And then it was, can they do it in Pakistan? And they keep on doing it. They've jumped every hurdle that has been put in their path so far. But I agree with you, this is a very strong Australian team. I don't think they'll be blown off course as easily as some of the other teams. And it's the biggest test of Bazball, if you want to put it like that, so far.
Gideon, you Australians are a macho bunch. Are you going to get drawn into
Receiving me, Stig, yeah. Mr. Puniverse, go on. Finish that thought.
I'm going to finish the thought with that you're a macho, but I wonder whether, do you think Australia might be tempted to play England's game? England are saying we're going to come out and be aggressive. Normally, historically, Australians are the aggressive lot, actually, in cricket.
That is interesting, isn't it? It reverses the traditional polarities, because we have always thought of ourselves in Australia as, you know, having the patent on audacity, and England kind of being our doer counterfoil. It will be an interesting challenge to Australian hubris, but I think this is such an experienced side. I think it's actually full of some quite down-to-earth personalities. Yeah, even someone as volatile as David Warner, who you might have thought is, you know, the kind of person who would pick up a gauntlet and slap you in the face with it. You know, he's now in his mid-30s and he can see the end, and he understands what it takes to win 5-day cricket in different conditions. This is an enormously experienced Australian side. If you lay it side by side with the England team, they do make a fascinating contrast. They're even just the top three of the respective teams. I mean, from my perspective, an awful lot has got to go right for the combination of Duckett, Pope, and Crawley to perform consistently over the course of a series, whereas there is just so much experience and expertise in Warner, Khawaja and Labuschagne, and we haven't even got to Steve Smith.
Well, that's an interesting point in itself, because I've been having this debate with my son, actually. If you had a combined team of England and Australia, you'd probably have more Australians in it than English. Is that true, do you think?
I did one the other day, and I kind of slightly pushed it in my biased English way, and just got to about 6-5 in favour of Australia.
Yeah.
So even if you're pushing it, you're probably slightly getting more Australians in a combined 11. But of course, that doesn't have any impact at all on the final result. No,
but it does point to the fact that this is we've had lots of iconic Australian teams. You know, I think back to the 2005 Ashes, which had Warne, had McGrath for some of it, had Ponting batting. Could this be an iconic Australian team? Is it good enough, do you think, for that?
I think it's in pursuit of its definitive feat, really. It's been a very resourceful and consistently successful team, but it very seldom gets the opportunity to play Test cricket on the scale of an Ashes. Now, these days, Test match series are bite-sized. They don't linger long in the memory. You actually don't get a lot of thanks for winning in Australia because you're expected to win. I think quite a lot rides on this series from the point of view of the legacy of this Australian team. And a lot of these players, it will be the last opportunity they get to play together. So that will redouble their determination. And of course, later this year, they have a World Cup to compete in India, which they'd dearly like to win as well.
Let's split between batting, bowling, and captaincy. On batting, it's really interesting, this question, Athers, because the top three, as Gideon was saying, everyone's worried about Crawley, and he seems to be in the team because no one else is there to replace him. Really, in batting, who do you think holds the key for this series for England or for Australia? Where do you think that will be won and lost?
Well, for Australia, I think Smith and Labuschagne are their two outstanding players. Smith is an incredible batsman to watch. I mean, he fidgets around and he's incredibly unorthodox, but has got a fantastic record, and one of the few Australian batters to have a better record, an excellent record in England. Quite a few of them, Khawaja, Warner, are less successful in England, and that's perhaps not a surprise. Different conditions, a Duke's ball, all very different to playing down under in Australia with a Kookaburra. But Smith and Labuschagne are the two, and if you said to Ben Stokes, who are the two that you'd quite like to see have a below par series, I think it would be those two. They're both exceptional, very greedy, very hungry batters. For England, fascinating lineup because you've got all the weaknesses at the top, or potential weaknesses at the top that Gideon talked about. Then you've got the class of Joe Root. You've got Ben Stokes coming at number 6. And then, particularly now that they've recalled Moeen Ali, which is a staggering selection after retiring 2 years ago, they're likely to bat very deep. And in England, what we've found over the last few years is often with the ball moving, scores are a bit lower than you might get in other parts of the world like Australia. So the contributions lower down the order, 6, 7, 8, can be the difference. I mean, whether Moeen Ali can rediscover any kind of form after such an absence is a massive question mark. But England will bat deep and they'll go hard.
Do you think the bowlers, the Australian bowlers, batsmen rather, Gideon will quite fancy having a go at Moeen Ali being brought back as a surprise after retirement? They'll be talking in their team meeting that they fancy a go at him, I would imagine.
Well, I think they would probably have had a go at Jack Leach as well as they tried to in 2021-22, because they know that England is dependent on James Anderson and Stuart Broad, bowlers who are getting towards the end of their careers. The sooner Australia can bring them back into the attack and to force them to do donkey work, the closer they are to blunting their effectiveness. I mean, I think Root's a very interesting figure in that English lineup. His Ashes record is not as good as it really should be for a player of his quality. The last time he really excelled was the last series where England won comfortably in 2015, and he was outstanding in that season. But ever since then, Australia has been able to get on top of him, and that has been a leading indicator of English vulnerability. Yeah, he's a player who really does need to set his record to rights.
Tell us about the Australian attack. Who's the notable figure in that?
Well, it's quite extraordinary the amount of cricket they're going to have to play this summer. They've got the World Test Championship final first of all, and then they've got 5 Test matches, 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 back to back. So I suspect that they are going to be spreading the wear as they have not had to do before. They are captained, of course, by a fast bowler in Pat Cummins, who will want to be available for all of those Test matches. If he does manage to get through the entirety of the Northern Test engagements, then we'll know he really is a Test match Iron Man. He struggled with the mantle of leading Australia in India, where, of course, it is difficult to lead by example as a fast bowler on pitches like the ones that India rolled out. It's much easier for him to do the kind of work that he's done over the last few years in England. But I'll be interested to see how he goes towards the back end of this series, particularly if it's close. Look, if Australia manages to get a 2-0 lead, there might be a case for resting Cummins from the third Test. But if it's as close as people suspect, and Cummins has to play in every single Test match, that's going to be a huge physical challenge for him.
Maybe there'll be a 3-0 England lead and he can have a rest on the 4th game, perhaps Gideon. Who knows? Who knows what could happen? We've got old men on our side as well. I mean, it's a very, very experienced attack for England, but we're relying, and the same point holds true for England, doesn't it? Five-day games, we're relying on probably the greatest bowler, perhaps one of the greatest bowlers England's ever produced, James Anderson, in his 40s. Broad is not young either, and they're 2 key parts of the attack, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, the Anderson story is an incredible story. I heard Pat Cummins talking the other day about he just played his 50th Test match, the World Test Championship final, and he was saying how much of a stretch that has been for him, because he had 6 years at the start of his career where he just had unbelievable injuries. And he said, if I ever got through to 100 tests, that would be quite an incredible thing. Well, of course, Anderson is 170 Test matches now, or some ridiculous number. So it's been an incredible career for James Anderson, and he still looks as fit and as lithe as ever, really. When you look at him physically, you see no signs of decline. But if there are any weaknesses, this series will find it out. 5 Test matches in 7 weeks, as Gideon says, is an incredible physical test. I mean, I can't imagine Anderson will play all 5. They will, as Australia will have to do, probably rest and rotate to some degree. And they've got some strength there, but a few months ago, Ben Stokes said he wanted 8 fast bowlers ready, fit and firing, and he's not going to have that because Archer is out of the series. Ollie Stone won't be fit until the back end of the series. And the big question mark is around Ben Stokes' knee. So he's a huge figure for England, not just as a kind of captain and batter, but also because of a 5th bowler who balances the side. If Stokes is not fit to bowl, and the other day in the Ireland game, He didn't look fit. He's only bowled for 10 minutes in practice. Didn't bowl in the IPL at all, 1 over. Looked really injured at the back end of the winter when I saw him in Wellington. And if he can't bowl, that puts a lot of stress and strain on the other seamers then. And there's some good seamers there. Anderson, Broad, Robinson, Wood shapes as a very important figure for England because he's the out-and-out quick bowler. And then they've just brought in a lad called Josh Tong who did really well on debut. So they do have some depth there, but Stokes is a very critical figure for England.
And there's a big chance, I suppose, that he's not going to bowl a lot, is he? He's clearly not going to be a...
You just never know with Stokes. It is impossible to know. He's very coy about the injury, and you just don't know whether, suddenly when the game is on the line at Edgbaston, he'll come in and bowl a 9 over spell. He is that type of character, and maybe that's us a little bit, just being a bit blinkered because we've seen the almost superhuman feats that he puts in on the cricket field when games are on the line. So maybe we're slightly blinkered by that. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him bowl at the crunch times when he has to.
And the final area, so we have batting, bowling and captaincy. Stokes is this inspirational figure for England, as Athers was saying, Gideon. I mean, is that an area where there might be a bit of advantage to England, actually, that it's hard to be a fast bowler and a captain, I'd imagine. I don't know why I feel that, but it feels like that's been the case. It feels like the captaincy fits more happily with Stokes maybe than it does with Cummins. I don't know if that's fair.
Look, it's certainly harder to do in some places than others. I mean, I think you saw how difficult it was for Cummins in India on those pitches. He has been accustomed to leading by example, by his excellence, and he didn't have that scope to do it in India. There are also personal issues clouding his contribution, and of course he went home after the second test because of his mother's illness. I would like to ask Michael a question. Is England capable of playing baseball without Ben Stokes?
He is so important to England. Ollie Pope is now the official vice-captain, and he's a very, very different character to Ben Stokes. I mean, nobody's like Ben Stokes, and I pity the man who has to take on the England captaincy after Ben Stokes. But the only thing I'd say is that this experiment, if you want to call it an experiment, is now 12 months old. All the players have absolutely bought into the philosophy and what is needed to be done. So if Stokes is not playing for injury or illness or whatever, I don't see England trying to play any other way, but they would be losing the man who has propelled them to this point. And I can't overstate Stokes is important. There's been very few teams, as Gideon will know, very few good test match teams that do not have a significant figure at the helm. If you think of those great Australian teams, Steve Waugh, Mark Taylor, Alan Border, these are significant characters. The great West Indies teams, Viv Richards, Clive Lloyd. And it's early days, it's only 12 months in, but I've thought watching Stokes that he is going to go down as one of the very best England captains. And it's a remarkable thing when you think about the contrasting, if you put Mike Brearley in that league, you couldn't have two more contrasting characters or types than Ben Stokes or Mike Brearley. But Stokes is a fascinating character. He's highly intelligent in his own way, deeply empathetic, very, very good man management skills. And all those things have combined at a particular time in his life when he's gone through the ups and downs of his early 20s as a cricketer, and is just right now, just right for it. And it's been a remarkable 12 months. A transformation that I don't think any of us could have anticipated.
Isn't when you look at baseball, I would, if you look back on your career, that it's kind of obvious once it's happened. Be aggressive, try to win test matches, pick players who can hit the ball hard, don't be scared of your own shadow. None of that seems to me particularly revolutionary, and yet once it's taken a revolution to happen, but you don't look back and think, God, I wish I played on teams that tried to win test matches occasionally.
Well, of course, it's a long time since I played now, 20 years, and the game has changed fundamentally in that time through T20. So England have a lot of young batters in particular, like Harry Brook, who is an outstanding young player. He's grown up in the world of T20. It is very natural for him in a way that it wasn't natural, particularly for my generation, who was brought up on, first-class cricket is a thing, test cricket is a thing, this is how you play it. These are the particular principles behind the game. All that has slightly changed now. So, the environment is very different. But the question remains, everybody's talking about this loss of fear of failure, and it doesn't really matter if you lose. Well, yes and no, because you kind of know that it does really matter. So
it didn't matter to them when they lost in New Zealand. I was very struck by that. For professional athletes, when they lost that game in New Zealand, Ben Stokes came out and said, well, we're just glad to be playing in an exciting game.
Well,
that's a funny old thing to say.
Well, the more remarkable thing, actually, is that Ben Stokes said that publicly after the game, but I'm led to believe that was exactly what Brendan McCullum said to the players in the dressing room. It was a devastating end to that game in Wellington when Jimmy Anderson was the last man out. And apparently Brendan McCullum waltzed into the dressing room as if he, just had a day on the beach at wherever and said, fantastic game, lads. What an absolutely fantastic game. So they're constantly pushing this message that, losing is not the be-all and end-all. It's sport. They're trying to strip it back to first principles. Why did you take the game up in the first place? We're there to entertain and give people a good day out. But of course, I think we all know that in the middle of a really tough 5 Test match Ashes series, it's not quite as straightforward.
Gideon, as an Aussie, you must be disgusted by the notion that winning doesn't matter in a game of cricket or in a game of anything.
Actually, my mind harked back to Headingley in 2019. When, of course, Australia was on the receiving end of a game that they shouldn't have lost, thanks to Ben Stokes' mercurial genius. And I remember Tim Payne saying pretty much the same. He was saying that it had been a great game to be part of. When a guy plays that way, it's almost a privilege to be an onlooker. And Australia picked itself up, dusted itself off, and absolutely caned England in the next Test match. I actually think that teams these days are much more capable of putting defeat behind them than they used to. Perhaps for the reasons, the sheer volume of cricket they now play, they're guaranteed, one match after another. Perhaps because T20 has introduced to them that idea that a game can be quickly sealed off and consigned to the past. Whereas in olden times, in the Atherton era, just to hark back to it again, there was a long period of recapitulation of games. There was a long periods of reflection. It stung to lose a game. You had a long time to think about it. There were endless kind of inquests, and we seem to take it more seriously.
The other thing I think as well is that in that time between perhaps my retirement and now, there's been a massive influx of money into the game. And part of the consequence of that has been the growth of what I would call a managerial class around a team. So you've got endless numbers of coaches and physios and strength and conditioning guys. And the game has become uber professionalised. And of course, that can be quite a suffocating thing for players, constantly monitored, watched, videoed, checked. And what, of course, Stokes and McCullum are trying to do is strip away that, actually, and almost get them playing in an amateur way, an amateur ethos, albeit very highly paid amateurs, if you know what I mean. So it's a bit more clever than people might imagine. I think there are certain principles behind it that make sense to me, because the players just seem happier, to be in that environment. And, of course, with all the options out there for young cricketers now, the other point that McCullum and Stokes make is that we want these young players to want to play Test cricket. And if they've got so many options out there, this franchise league, that franchise league, we've got to make Test cricket the most exciting, the most interesting place to be.
And there's a lot of rest on this series in that sense, Gideon, in your view, because I watch a lot of T20 cricket, and I can find it very boring. But the knock is that it's more exciting than Test cricket. Do we need a magnificent summer Ashes here to lay down a marker that Test cricket's not going anywhere?
Well, I think we didn't realise that we needed 2005 as much as we did. Afterwards, we realised that we'd been present while history was made, and it had actually been so long since we'd had a genuinely competitive Ashes series. There was the thrill of lack of familiarity, but in 2005, I think we're still receiving the benefits of 2005 in some ways. It's become a benchmark in the way that 1981 was before then. It was, of course, the last summer of free-to-air television in coverage of Test match cricket in England. It had enormous reach. It was a great summer to be part of. Michael and I were both reporting it, and it really did feel like the country was falling back in love with cricket. It hadn't realised how much it loved the game until it felt that the throb of kinship that Andrew Flintoff and Kevin Peterson gave it that summer. I think we'd love to see it again. I think Australians would love to see it again. I mean, as you know, we don't mind winning the Ashes 4-0 as we did in 2010-11 or 5-0 in 27-18, but we love a competitive Ashes series. I mean, I can remember coming back to Australia in 2005 and going back to my local club, and we had a third more players than we would normally have in a pre-season. Everyone came out of that Australian winter just absolutely desperate to play cricket, could not wait to get back on the park. And in some ways, I think Australian cricket needs a bit of a shot in the arm almost as much as English cricket.
Michael, are you looking forward to writing about it?
I am. It's going to be, well, I'll be broadcasting and writing, so the combination is going to be incredibly interesting. Like Gideon, I'm expecting a fantastic summer. And there's no better thing, really, to write about great Test cricket. If we get something like 2005, then we'll be so lucky. I mean, that is the high bar. I think we'll be very lucky to get anything like that. But if we do, well, it'll be fantastic.
Does anyone want to venture a prediction for the series score? Gideon, you go first as an Aussie.
Look, I mean, I think Australia's got the edge. I'd love to think otherwise, and I'd love to be proved wrong. But what part of the problems I think in 2005 was that Australian team was not quite as hungry as previous Australian teams. It was dining out a little bit on its reputations, and England caught it unawares. I don't think that will happen this summer. I think this is a very, very well-drilled Australian team with probably too much experience in the end for England. But look, in 2019, I think English cricket was dead and buried after 2 days at Headingley, and 3 days later, we were toasting the Renaissance. That's the thing that Ashes cricket generates. Wonderfully memorable moments that are all the more memorable for occurring during Ashes. Michael, what do you think?
I want a number from you in a second, Gideon. Michael, go on.
Oh, I've been so puzzled ahead of this series. No, before England went to Australia 2 years ago, I'd have laid all my money on a heavy Australian win. This time, I can't forecast it because so many things could happen given that 5 Test matches are coming in 7 weeks. You could easily get to a situation where Stark and Cummins get injured in the first 2 Test matches, and then Australia are very, very thin on bowling. So it is slightly impossible to predict. I don't think there'll be many draws. I don't know. 3-1 England.
3-1 England. Gideon?
No, I'll go 3-2 Australia, and Stokes will break down the first Test match. And Moeen Ali will be made England captain just to complete his resurrection.
Stranger things have happened. What a pleasure it is talking to you both. It's going to be a hell of a summer. Thank you very much, Gideon Haigh. Thanks, Michael Atherton, as well. And you can read Gideon and Athers in the Times each day throughout the Ashes. You don't want to miss the Times' coverage of it. It's always a pleasure. Updates, of course, here on Times Radio as well.